Welcome to the MSc Technology Centre podcast. Today with me I've got Adam Tipper. Adam, thanks for joining me. One of the first on this type of podcast. Just let us know what Next Gen makers actually do.
So I've worked in and around engineering and manufacturing for the best part of the last 20 years. 5 years ago started Next Gen Makers because throughout my whole career in the industry, the narrative around the skill shortage just wasn't changing. It was kind of like an acceptance that there was one and it was a problem. So I thought, well, why not try to have a go at doing something a little bit different to try and change that? So initially, with the West Midlands focus, tried to raise awareness of SMEs in different supply chains, because what we found was if you go into a school and you speak to young people or influencers of young people, they only really knew about engineering brands like Rolls-Royce, JLR and JCB, etc. They didn't know about the hundreds of...
So like all the big boys out there.
Exactly, yeah. They didn't know about the smaller companies, of which there are loads and of which you can have a really good career. So the kind of ambition was to create a platform to promote those kind of companies in the region. So we had a really good first couple of years, 3 years doing that, and getting lots of young people into apprenticeships with those kind of companies. So we acted as kind of like a champion for that. What we noticed though was there are a lot of inconsistencies with how companies were running apprenticeship schemes. So you'd speak to some that were really, really successful, and then you'd speak to others that weren't. And there were lots in between. And when I say successful, I mean successful in terms of their ability to attract talent and their ability to ultimately retain it. So what we kind of did was this was just prior to COVID, we spoke to about 100 engineering and manufacturing companies, most of whom were running successful apprenticeship schemes. We looked at what they were doing, how they were doing it and why. And what we found, there were a lot of commonalities that they were doing things similarly. And then with the companies that weren't as successful, which we spoke to as well, they weren't doing the kind of stuff that the successful companies were doing. So we're like, okay, if we can bottle the good stuff, the best practice that's working for the successful companies and share that more widely throughout UK engineering and manufacturing on a national basis, that could be a really useful, beneficial thing.
So initially, was you just around the Midlands area?
Yeah, totally. So just West Midlands, really. Which, when you're trying to engage with schools, that's a big area.
Yeah.
You know, thousands of schools. So now we're national, totally national, all across the UK, with what has become our engineering apprenticeships best practice programme.
So you mentioned about the successful ones and the not so successful ones. What was you seeing in the not so successful ones?
Well, there's a multitude of different factors. The thing is, it's not as simple as just going to a college and getting an apprentice, which I think a lot of companies expect it to be or assume it's going to be. Also, it's about reframing how certain decision makers at certain companies think about and perceive about apprentices, and what they can do for the business.
So are you saying there that generally they try and hire people just because they think they need somebody in a certain area, but they're not actually looking at the whole business itself and where they could fit?
Yeah, absolutely. So it could be like, we're really busy at the moment, we need an apprentice. Whereas I think the successful companies are maybe adopting a slightly longer term view and more strategic view, which is sort of looking at succession planning and skills gap analysis and saying, okay, what skills are we lacking? Where do we need to develop existing employees to upskill them? Which can be done through an apprenticeship scheme as well. It's not always bringing in young people. But if you are succession planning and you've got X amount of people retiring within the next 5 years, then clearly there needs to be, you need to get ahead of it, don't you? You know.
I mean, from my experience, excuse me, from my experience is when I did my apprenticeship on the shop floor, which was probably 21 years now thinking about it, it was generally the fact of, we're busy, we need to get some labour in, we'll get in apprentices at the same time. I think back then they did some sort of a scheme where they got some money back off the government for taking apprentices on. I don't know if that's correct or not. But what I was seeing was companies was taking on multiple people, but then playing them off against each other to see who the best was, and then they would get rid of the other ones. And I can talk from personal experience, that's what happened with me.
Why did they get rid of you?
No, thankfully they kept me. But that was what happened. They started 3 people on. There was me and 2 other guys. And thinking back, it was almost like they was heading us off against each other, academically and engineeringly minded as well. So after about 6 months, they got rid of the other 2 people, kept me on. But then the following year, you saw them doing the same thing, and it was almost like the cheap labour side of things to try and just get the work out the door. Is that what you was seeing, or is it similar to what you do see?
You do see it, yeah. I mean, I think competition is good to an extent, isn't it? But you can't let it be threatening. It's not conducive to a good working environment if it is. And
I know that we're partners with Next Gen Makers. How did that one all come about?
Okay, so I think it was about 3 years ago, and get a notification from LinkedIn, and it's Dave Darby from MSC, and he said, Adam, notice what you're doing. Looks really interesting, would love to have a chat. So he came across and had a chat. Long story short, MSC became a sort of key sponsor of NextGen, which was really helpful in helping me to get the business off the ground in the early days. Fast forward a year, and we'd done some great stuff together, the two organisations, and Dave was like, you know, this really fits with our value proposition, this really fits with our vision, our values. We'd like to acquire a stake in the business. So they did. We went through the process, which was a new one for me. Never done anything like that before, but really interesting process. And MSC acquired 49% of the business.
So you sort of touched on the skills shortage in that first part. Where do you think that skills shortage has all come from?
So when I said it's not just as simple as going to a college and asking for an apprentice, what I meant was, and there are commonalities in successful approaches. So there's a huge piece of work around strategy and planning, in terms of succession planning, as I said, skills gap analysis. Then there's a piece around getting the culture right. So you've got a pro-apprentice culture within the business where apprentices feel valued, part of things, and you've also got a culture of time-served engineers that want to give knowledge and training to the apprentices, because above everything else, the apprentice is a learner, not a worker. So in the example you gave, it's clearly the company viewing apprentices as workers, not learners. Yeah. You know, an apprenticeship is a learning journey, isn't it? It's about learning the right knowledge, skills and behaviours to do that job really well. So big cultural piece. Then there are different successful approaches to attracting talent and creating a talent pipeline. So some companies out there are absolutely inundated with applications for apprenticeships. Yeah. Others really struggle. And that's all about employer brand awareness and sort of outreach into schools, colleges to create awareness, positive perception and create a talent pipeline. And then there are different approaches to onboarding, integrating new talent and then mentoring and developing it. So what we're trying to do through our Engineering Apprenticeships Best Practice Programme, which is effectively like a big community of around 50, 60 engineering and manufacturing companies from across the UK that are committed to running the best apprenticeship schemes they possibly can, is sort of knowledge share best practice, share what's working, and
is this across businesses?
Yeah. So this isn't like me or NextGen or us bringing on experts from education to tell people they're doing it wrong and there's a better way of doing it. It's not that at all. It's totally the opposite. It's actually companies saying, come and learn from us. Which I think, if you imagine engineering about 50 years ago, you'd never get this, would you? No. You'd never have like engineering companies going, open up our doors, come and learn from us.
Come and look what we're doing.
Now we're doing it in the virtual realm, so we're doing this all through online events and guest speakers on things like webinars, but they're doing a really real deep dive in some of the stuff that they're doing really well, and they're proud to share it. They want to share it. Yeah. You know, I think because collectively what we all want to see is a strong future for UK engineering and manufacturing. Now we're not going to get that with 186,000 young engineers short every year for the next 6 years, and really poor retention rates, which we're seeing at the moment, of apprentices. So we've got to tackle the two things, getting more young people into the industry and then keeping them there.
I know I've spoke to you about this before, about when I've been on the shop floor and I felt as though I was the young guy on the shop floor, the 16, 17-year-old who was trying to learn. And this is back in the time when overtime was booming and the older guys was feeling that they was under threat with their jobs because these new people was coming in, so they would withhold the information that they knew and they wouldn't like to teach you. Do you reckon that is what could have caused this gap that we're looking at?
It's probably a contributing factor, but as I said, it's very complex. There's like numerous factors that has caused the skills gap, and you know, maybe one other one is we're so busy we can't even think about it. But you know, you're busy for 6 months, and then you're getting products out the door. You're busy for the next 6 months, and then the next 6 months, and before you know it, 10 years have passed, and you've done nothing. And hang on a minute, there's a gap in our workforce between the youngest and the next person.
Yeah, I think it also falls in certain jobs as well, because I know that a member of my family is an engineer, and they are a tool maker, and they are probably one of the last tool makers in that business because they never brought any new talent on, and now they do not want to release him, even though he's past the retirement age. So how are they actually thinking of themselves down the line, future-proofing their business if they're not even thinking today about getting the new talent in?
It's key, isn't it? It's really important to have that, to try and have that longer term view. I know for many industries, many verticals in engineering, it is really difficult to adopt that longer term view. It's hard to plan, but I think all I can say is that the companies that are really successful in attracting and retaining apprentice talent and actually future-proofing skills in their business are finding the way to find time to do the strategic planning and thinking ahead. And then also things like equipping their mentors with the skills to be good mentors. Because it's not just a case of finding somebody on the shop floor and going, will you look after so-and-so for however long period of time. That's not a mentor. There's pastoral support as well that goes with the actual tutoring. Again, on the cultural piece, you touched upon people being willing to divulge knowledge and skills and perhaps being threatened by having to do that. I've never really understood that, because if you've got that much knowledge and that much skills, you're really valuable to that business. You've got nothing to fear from, nobody's going to come and replace you. Certainly not somebody who's straight out of school, straight out of college and hasn't done the job for a month, let alone 30, 40 years.
There's some of the guys that I work with here who are so knowledgeable, but they're coming towards the end of their working career. And if I could put a USB in the back of their head and download that knowledge, it would be phenomenal. But it's working with them and MSc and the associates to draw that out, ready for the next stage of what we're going to be facing.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing is the successful companies that create an environment where they take those individuals on a journey with them, so they feel part of it. They don't feel threatened by it, they feel part of it, and they understand the why behind it. They understand why they're giving away this knowledge to the next generation, why ultimately that will benefit them, perhaps by safeguarding the jobs and safeguarding the future of the company. Because I think, we're getting to the point now where it isn't, we can't carry on saying, oh yeah, there's a skill shortage in engineering.
At some point we've got to take a stand and start doing something about it.
We are in the oh no zone. If we don't do something about it within the next 5 years, it's an existential threat to the future of UK manufacturing, and that's something that I know a lot of people take very seriously. But I think collectively as an industry, we need to come together and.
So if this doesn't, I'm just thinking hypothetically now, if this doesn't get addressed, do you think that our manufacturing business could eventually dwindle out? Yeah,
100%. Because it's also it doesn't just extend to the people doing the work; it extends to the people training the next generation. Yeah. There's a massive shortage in the UK of skilled engineers that go on to become tutors, because it takes a certain type of person to become a tutor and to want to teach. The pay rates are poor in comparison to industry. So unless you're really passionate about it, you're not going to do it for the money.
So almost they're training people who are going to go on to earn more than what they're being trained.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. So unless you've got a real burning desire to leave a legacy, which I know there are some amazing people out there that do have that, and fair play to them. Unless you've got that, you're not going to do it for the money, because you can stay in industry and get way more. So we've got to address that, because we need people trained.
So eventually, what you're saying is there could be then a shortage of the tutors.
Well, there is now.
There is now.
It's chronic. There is now. If you speak to any engineering training provider across the UK, possibly their biggest challenge is getting tutors and assessors for engineering courses.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's a massive problem. Anything any organisations can do to try and bridge that skills and competency gap by getting skilled engineers into education, even if it's like subsidising their time to go in and teach. I don't know if there's a way to do that, or from whether they need qualifications to teach. But we've got to think outside the box. I mean, we've got an apprenticeship levy, which is effectively a tax. This billions is going unspent. The big engineering firms, manufacturing firms are paying into the levy. It's going unspent. There's a lot of good work being done to repatriate that money to smaller firms to take on apprentices, which is brilliant. But Could we not use a levy like that to subsidise the wages of
Wages
tutors?
of the tutors, yeah.
So it's more attractive. You know, we've got to start thinking outside the box. We've got these challenges.
You've got to start to evolve.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what you see in the general schools of today, they still teach the same things they have always taught. So the way I see it is time moves on constantly. Your iPhones and your Androids are constantly being updated. Things that you just use day in, day out. But when it comes to the curriculum, they seem to stick with, this has always worked, this is what we're going to do. So I think by you saying think outside the box, that's very true, to start attracting new talent, one, into the industry, but two, to start retaining, and if not even attracting more talent from the tutor-wise.
Absolutely, yeah. So, but it's really complex challenge, these skill shortages, because you've got competencies of companies to run successful apprenticeship schemes. You've got young people, parents, influencers wanting to signpost young people to engineering, young people wanting to become engineers. Then you've got the curriculum at schools, the fact that schools, probably most schools, especially those with sixth forms, want to push young people towards university, which might not be in their best interest.
Yeah.
Then you've got the tutor shortage. There's a lot of things that it's a very complex issue, but it's not something that with outside the box thinking can't be addressed. And I think ultimately what we need industry to do is try to come together, and there are some amazing organisations out there doing some brilliant work in different pockets, but I think what we need is somebody to hold the sort of the baton and say, right, we'll be in charge of bringing everybody together so we can make this coordinated and cohesive and maximise impact of all of it.
I know you've been working with companies on giving them the your Kite Mark accreditation. Do you want to explain a bit about that?
Yeah, so about a year into running the Engineering Apprenticeships Best Practice Programme, Make UK, the national manufacturing body, had conversations with us, and they were like, love what you're doing. And I think between us, we kind of acknowledged there was a bit of a gap for an Investors in People style accreditation that specifically recognised excellent employers for engineering apprenticeships. So if you imagine like yourself, a young Matt, anywhere over the UK, any town in the UK, and you sat there and you're thinking, I want to do an engineering apprenticeship.
But where do I go?
Exactly. How do you know? How do you know who are the genuinely good employers for engineering apprenticeships? You don't, do you? There's nowhere you can look.
Have they truly got the best interest at heart for whoever they're bringing on?
Exactly. How do you not end up one of the ones that
ends up with the cheap labour?
bad experience?
Bad experiences, yeah.
You know, you want to be signposted by careers leaders, your parents or their influencers, and or finding stuff off your own back to the best employers, don't you?
Yeah.
So, but there wasn't anything. And you think, actually, that doesn't make sense because we've got a massive skill shortage in engineering, yet there's nothing to signpost young people that actually want to get into engineering towards the best employers.
Go to that one over there. Thank you for being me on this podcast.
Pleasure.
I think it's been a great one. So thank you for being me on this podcast.